today's World Insight. The Association of Southeast Asian Nations doubled down on trade and growth as ASEAN leaders gather for a meeting in Indonesia. What are the recovery prospects within the regional bloc? Here is our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Indonesia hosts the ASEAN Summit from May the 9th to the 11th this week. ASEAN nations are keen on economic recovery as they tackle inflation and transition into a post-pandemic era. The summit's theme, ASEAN Matters, Epicentrum of Growth, shows that the regional bloc has become more confident in its role as a global economic engine. The summit is also expected to reinforce de-dollarization efforts as the bloc looks to promote trade in local currencies. What are the prospects for economic integration within ASEAN and between ASEAN and the world, especially China? Let's ask our panelists. For more on China-ASEAN relations in Jakarta, Dr. Ibrahim Rahman, Senior Research Associate at Indonesia Financial Group Progress. In Tokyo, Lim Tian-Wai, Adjunct Senior Research Fellow from the East Asian Institute at National University of Singapore. In Kuala Lumpur, Kazi Mahmood, an ASEAN Affairs Analyst based in Kuala Lumpur. In Shanghai, Shending Li, Professor of the Institute of International Studies with Fudan University of China. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us. I have a very strong panel. I want to start by asking all of you about how to avoid geopolitical tensions in the region and what is the best way to create peace with the joint efforts between China and ASEAN. Let's go to Mr. Rahman.
The main issue in the region is we have to achieve decent level of economic progress in the region. So as we see that IMF projection has stated that economic growth will be declining compared to last year, even though that ASEAN annual growth rate is always much higher than what is projected by global institution that World Bank or IMF. So ASEAN should grow on focusing on most important problem, most important aspect that they have to achieve. And Indonesian chairmanship will provide opportunity for ASEAN to play an active role, offering ideas and solutions that will create greater benefits of peace and prosperity in the region. And that will be one solution to focus on what is more important for the region.
Mr. Lim, ASEAN bigger role, what kind of role exactly is that? How will ASEAN be able to go between the big powers, let's just say the United States, China, and some of the others in the region? Will ASEAN be able to play that role?
I think ASEAN's future is defined by Indonesia as the chair. And there are several goals and objectives that they have mentioned in this coming year. They wish to develop social, cultural aspects of ASEAN. They wish to strengthen the health, pandemic security of ASEAN for future management of a crisis, and also post-pandemic recovery. And in these three areas, I think all the great powers in the region are in agreement as well. So if ASEAN is able to play its driver's role for regionalism, then it has the ability to bring all these great powers together and work on these changes together. And also to note, the two biggest power in the region, the US and China, have also great agreements on climate change agenda. And in fact, according to the latest report, Beijing has invited the environmental czar, John Kerry, to speak and also to communicate in China. And so ASEAN is also interested to play the role, especially in the aspect of developments, economic developments in the region with a green agenda.
From Malaysia, the current government is promising that ASEAN should focus on centrality. What is the central role ASEAN can play? How ASEAN countries should unite to face the external challenges and to face the local geopolitical issues. If Malaysia goes on its own, it is not going to help ASEAN. If Philippines continue to go on its own and join the US, for example, which is the threat that we see today, then it's not going to be peaceful. You see, it's going to disturb a lot of things. The creation of ASEAN was for peace, for centrality, for development and progress, economic, political, social, cultural. And I think on the cultural aspect in particular, which we sometimes avoid to look at, I think ASEAN has unity in this aspect. Sometimes we wear the same clothing in ASEAN. Sometimes we have the same food. We share the same things, you know? And we have a lot of Chinese people in Malaysia. And so we share commonness with China more than with the West. In my last interview of Tun Dr. Mahathir, who was he was not the prime minister then, it was in 2021, sorry. So he told me that China is not placing any barriers on the sea. You see, for example, we are being told that China is aggressive, but Tun Mahathir said that China is not placing anything on the sea, any barriers, any toll gates to tell countries in the region, you have to pay that much to cross this sea into the South China Sea. He means to say that South China Sea is still free for people to navigate. You see, the US is pushing for navigation in the seas, freedom of navigation. But I think ASEAN could tell the foreign powers. My point is that ASEAN should and could tell the foreign powers that we are united. We still want China to be our partner, and we still want the rest of the world to cooperate with us and to progress.
Go to you, Professor Shen. What do you think? What is the key that would hold peace and stability still intact in the region?
There are three keys. One is ASEAN unity, speaking with one voice. Second, ASEAN neutrality. ASEAN shall not take sides between and amongst major powers. That would eventually hurt ASEAN. So ASEAN shall have a long view, a long strategy, rather than take a short-term interest. Three is playing a bridging role between major powers to prevent them from having trouble. So I heard ASEAN is proposing to link China's Belt and Road initiative to the US proposed Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. That's a great idea.
So it seems I learned a lot of key words, gentlemen, from what you have just said. Unity, neutrality, and practicality in a way, pragmatism. Make sure things are done to the benefits of all of us. But how shall we do it? You know, Mr. Rahman, one of the things I have found out is that rhetorics, propaganda these days, are speaking in louder voice than realities and facts. You may say it's a result of social media, but certainly it is a result of a very divided world. So, Mr. Rahman, how can we really listen to each other directly rather than through any third party?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting, stimulating question from you, that the current chairmanship, 2023 in particular, is coming out at a time when the world is becoming increasingly complex with the globalizations. And from the geopolitical and economic standpoint, the world is experiencing multidimensional challenges. As mentioned by a colleague in Kuala Lumpur, great power rivalries becoming sharpened, and then great power rivalries need to be managed so that we can avoid open conflict, especially that ASEAN is always seen as a very promising area where investment, trade, economic activities is always leading the whole region in Asia. So I think by listening to each other on what is the most important for the region, I think Indonesia's chairmanship in this year we will focus on, making ASEAN more stable and more peaceful region as the anchor for the world stability. And for that, we have ASEAN member states and surrounding countries must constantly uphold international law and not become a proxy for anyone. Asia should maintain internal peace for Southeast Asia and the Indo-Pacific region and the greater arena. So that will be probably one aspect that ASEAN member state can, put an overarching goal for the region to be achieved together.
Some were trying to compare the issue of Taiwan, for example, with the issue of Ukraine crisis. Some were also suggesting, there are various documents concerning Taiwan, whether what China claims is still relevant or not. These are noises that you see in propaganda and rhetorics. But the thing is how to make sure that people are focused on the real issue. I guess that is the most important thing, since the Taiwan issue is dearest to the heart of China. So let me hear from you, Mr. Shen, about how can we avoid listening and believing even in rhetorics and propaganda rather than focusing on the real issues.
Well, I think America is complaining that some other major power is not respecting a rule-based international order. I think this is a good point of departure. America and some ASEAN countries may feel China's behavior in South China Sea, the land reclamation may constitute certain breaching of the UNCLOS, United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. So they say you have to respect international law. In my personal view, I think this issue may have two ramifications. One is the economic interest. China may have some stronghold which would protect its fishermen to have more convenient and secure access to those sea-based vitamins. The other is security. China is worried about. America is employing an Indo-Pacific strategy to employ its former PACOM, Pacific Command, and also Central Command based Navy and Air Force to come to this place, passing through South China Sea, come to East China Sea, come to Taiwan Strait, and to handle China. And this constitutes a violation of the United Nations Charter. I think all countries should respect UN rule, fundamentally UN Charter, respecting China's sovereignty over Taiwan, which is recognized by all ASEAN countries and also by the United Nations, and also theoretically by the US government. Meantime, all countries, including China, should respect UNCLOS. So China has room to talk to our ASEAN friends on how to improve our behavior in South China Sea. Given this, I think ASEAN countries have a lot to do. Not only complain about China on South China Sea, but also our friends have room to complain with America. Why violate the UN Charter, making various US domestic law to militarily and politically intervene into China's internal affairs? I do think that ASEAN has a very constructive role to do. For instance, think tanks in ASEAN country can invite a Chinese think tank, American think tank to ASEAN country to have a dialogue. ASEAN as a grouping can invite the Chinese government and US government to come to ASEAN to have a friendly chat. So I do hope our friends, we think ASEAN is our friend. Americans think it's a friend of ASEAN country. Why not all three parties to become more genuine friend, exchange genuine concern, and improve our respective behavior?
Is that too much to expect ASEAN to do, Mr. Lim?
Well, I think Indonesia has also laid out an agenda this year that is related to what has been mentioned, which is Indonesia wants ASEAN to strengthen itself institutionally. So in order to reach the objectives that all the previous speakers have mentioned, Indonesia is focusing on domestic strengthening of ASEAN institution so that, as someone has mentioned earlier on, it can speak with one voice, it can be stronger and more united. And in that sense, then it can play the capacity for the next 2 points, which is emphasize the areas in which the great powers, especially the two great powers, agree on. And that is the climate change agenda, and some may even say the Korean Peninsula peace. There's also a second point that ASEAN can play, which is it may not be realistic for very strong geopolitical problems to be resolved quickly, but at least the temperatures can be tuned down and create the positive atmosphere for greater dialogue and conversation. And that is certainly a role that ASEAN can play, particularly since it has members that are close to all different powers, not just the US and China, but to other middle and also regional powers in the world.
Let me move on from the topic on geopolitics to the topics of real bilateral and multilateral cooperation in trade, cultural exchanges, as well as building greener economies. To you, Professor Shen, Belt and Road Initiative celebrating 10th anniversary. Many of those ASEAN economies are partners with China along the Belt and Road, and they have been contributing from their part as well. Meanwhile, working with China on many important projects. So how do you see the role of ASEAN for the success of the Belt and Road?
Well, I think ASEAN still has quite some needs for better infrastructure. And that can be helped by Japan, by China, by America, by EU. How ASEAN can bring all these friends together, not just China, not just Japan, but bring them together, putting their technical competence, financial resource, plus the resource from ASEAN country. I think ASEAN can do better. For the second decade, such a development is not only driven by external players. ASEAN can say, we have a strategy, we would invite you. ASEAN can play the host. Particularly, I have one project in my mind, which is to build a railroad from China to Vietnam, to Indonesia, to Malaysia, etc. Of course, that will need to do a lot of engineering work, including bridge, tunnels, etc. But that is not undoable.
Yeah, right now, Mr. Rahman, we also see whether it is a parallel or counter initiative, I don't know, but a Build Better World plan coming from the US 2021. How much have we seen real implementation of that plan taking place between the US and ASEAN in terms of real projects, railways, infrastructures, production, green development, as well as digital economies?
Well, yeah, I think the relationship between ASEAN and Indonesia, in particular with the US, is becoming much less if we compare the relationship between Indonesia and ASEAN to China. So, of course, US is still one of the important major trade partners for ASEAN and for Indonesia in particular. As we see during the trade wars period of Trump presidency, the impact of trade blockage will be has been impacting Indonesia and ASEAN as well. But in relation to the real project in ASEAN or in Indonesia in particular, I don't see that there has been massive increase of the US-Indonesia, US-ASEAN relationship if we compare with China. China has much more clear roadmap on how to connect ASEAN economy with China with Belt and Road Initiative. In Indonesia, we will be soon experiencing the fast train between Jakarta and Bandung. And I think one of the challenges when talking about China infrastructure is the debate between labor absorption, local and foreign absorption of workers, which is becoming more important to digest, more important to disentangle between the real impact of the host country due to the project introduced by China government and China relationship with ASEAN. I think ASEAN countries in general have the same experience of benefiting more inflow of capital infrastructure development in each country, but the benefit in relation to labor participations, for instance, local empowerment is important to be discussed and to go through.
Go to you also, Mr. Mahmood. We have seen China and ASEAN economies committing to agricultural development, committing to technology development, committing to green development over the past years. There are even specific numbers about how much China has vowed to import agricultural products from ASEAN economies, starting from Chinese president's visit earlier into the region. So tell me more about how do you see the implementation of these specific projects, Belt and Road Initiative as one of them, and many others as well?
Yeah, there are many aspects of Chinese involvement in ASEAN, in particular. When I was in Cambodia, I could see how Cambodian government is making a lot of effort to educate its people on skills and on capacity building and on growth of production of fruits and vegetables for exports to China, which is a very important aspect of the economy today. And this is happening in Malaysia soon, because Anwar Ibrahim went to China recently and back, and he says that China will be investing a few billions in the country, which is a positive aspect of the development between Malaysia and China. And it has also to do with green economy, and not only with the brown or with the gray aspect of things. But what I mean to say is China is a very close friend of Malaysia, is a very close friend of ASEAN. Many things are together. You know, they are reciprocal. It goes both ways. And China is trying its best to get Malaysia on board with BRI, Belt and Road, with the ECR that is ongoing, the railroad in the north of the country, which is populated area down there towards Thailand. And that could connect in the future, who knows, Thailand with Malaysia with a train link. So speaking about train, speaking about transportation, about infrastructure and agriculture, Malaysia is trying to go into more production of its own agriculture and also for export. Durian is one of the products being exported to China, which is very popular in China. And this has also made links between cooperation between China and Malaysian businesses, you know, in very good terms. That's what I can say about this development aspect.
Mr. Lim, also, RCEP has been a paramount trade mechanism that China and ASEAN are extremely proud of. So tell me more about how do you see, even though it is quite a basic trade pact, how do you see its future impact on this region and on the cooperation with the economies involved, which certainly includes China and ASEAN's?
Well, RCEP certainly is still the world's largest free trade agreement. It is indeed an achievement that was signed at a time when the world was disrupted by a pandemic and anti-globalization forces. That alone is a symbol of the determination of the region, as well as all the members of RCEP, to push forward with free trade. Now, as you know, there is also a CPTPP, and the UK is edging towards joining it. China has also applied to join it. Now, if CPTPP and RCEP can go forward with the momentum that they have already created, then eventually they can fall under the FTAAP, Free Trade Agreement of the Asia Pacific.
Right.
This can only benefit a much larger region in which we can use international trade to bind countries together with greater interdependence and therefore lower the chances of conflict. Within this FTAP, RCEP, and CPTPP, the schemes like BRI will continue to play a very big role, because you need the infrastructure in order for trade to take off. Trade cannot take off without adequate infrastructure, and ASEAN is also facing the prospect of welcoming a new member, which is Timor-Leste. And certainly Timor-Leste is starting from very low base when it comes to infrastructure development. So but BRI will play a very important role. And like Professor Shen says, there is always a role for developmentalism in capacity building, regardless of which country it comes from, because it can only offer a buffet of options for different countries, whether it is basic infrastructure or high quality infrastructure offered by all the big powers, including China, with their specific strengths in different areas. Thank you.
One of the things, Mr. Liam, I know you have always been very passionate about is the technology cooperation, the digital ASEAN, as you mentioned many times in our interviews earlier, and also the digital cooperation between China and ASEAN. China certainly has already have a very good base for that. How do you see China and ASEAN economies will be able to combine the most important, shall I say, surplus they have in terms of cooperation and be able to empower this China-ASEAN relations with a digital prospect?
At a time when the Chinese tech giants were facing headwinds from global disruption, they have actually set up operational headquarters in Singapore. And all the Chinese tech giants have also managed to sold and push and marketed their systems to different ASEAN countries, whether in terms of smart transportation systems or other AI-based system. And also ASEAN has the network of smart cities in which China is already playing a very major role in it. So I think the way forward is that ASEAN is determined to jump onto Industry 4.0, in which it is lagging behind major tech powers in the world, and certainly China can play a part in it. And everybody knows that the two great tech powers in the world are China and the US. So China has a lot to offer to ASEAN when it comes to technology transfer, turnkey projects, and also technological sharing. And in this sense, I think there's a lot of focus on chatbots, AI chatbots recently, and certainly Ernie, which is released by Baidu, and also Alibaba's chatbot are very much in the advanced cutting edge of AI technology. And these kinds of technology point the way forward for cooperation between China and ASEAN countries.
Gentlemen, I have my gratitude for all of you. Our first part of the conversation focused on the heated debate about geopolitics. Our second part is focusing on the many constructive projects that are going on between China and the ASEAN economies. Certainly the latter is making us to believe in a better future while trying to deal with the headaches of the former. But for now, I want to thank all of you for making your contribution into this conversation. We hope all these projects, good for the people, will be implemented for all. Thank you so much for joining us. Ibrahim Rahman, Lim Tian Wai, Kazi Mahmood, Shending Li. Thank you. That's my discussion with our panelists on ASEAN Summit this week. That's all we have for today. You can find us on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow.